Humanist ceremony filled with music and fond memories was held at the Royal Hospital Kilmainham for journalist Mary Raftery. The Taoiseach was represented by Commandant Michael Tracy, the President by Captain Emmett Harney. Chief mourners were Mary Raftery's husband David, son Ben and mother Ita, and many other family members and close friends were in attendance. Celebrant Brian Whiteside described Mary Raftery as having an extraordinarily well-lived life and said she was mourned by the country as a whole.
Well, as you heard, that was an RTE news report on the funeral of journalist Mary Raftery last week. And Mary was buried after a humanist ceremony in Kilmainham. Coincidentally, it was one of two high-profile humanist ceremonies last week. Mental health campaigner John McCarthy was also buried after a humanist service. So what exactly is a humanist service and how different is it? From, let's say, the traditional church service, Brian Whiteside was the celebrant at Mary Raftery's. And
yes, indeed. That was this day last week.
Yeah, this day last week, exactly.
And it was, of course, a huge funeral. We had it in the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham, in the Great Hall there, which I think there must have been about 1,000 people. It's not a venue we use very often, but it's almost like a sort of a secular cathedral. You know, I think one of the challenges we have is where to hold these ceremonies, because unlike the churches, we don't have a network of lovely buildings around the country, but we hold them where we can. And I think a humanist funeral is very much, it's very personal. It's, I think, very meaningful. It's very much about reflecting on the life, recognising the sadness at losing the person, but at the same time taking the opportunity to celebrate that life that was lived. And goodness me, in the case of Mary, what a life and what a legacy. And I think it's very much about that balance, the sadness and the celebration.
It's the same as a normal service in a church, in a Catholic church.
Well,
I'm thinking, I mean,
in a way, although my understanding,
people get up and they say nice things about the person and they remember what a great person they were.
I know that has evolved, but strictly speaking, that's not part of the Catholic funeral. I mean, the Catholic funeral is a religious ceremony. I'm not an expert on exactly all the thinking behind Catholicism.
Nor am I, but I'm just thinking back to one I attended.
But the strict guidelines from the Vatican are that there should not be a eulogy. You should not speak about the person. It is a mass. It is not a celebration of the life. That is more of a humanist thing. And we, obviously, as humanists, we aren't religious. And rather than looking at any religious rite or prayers or looking to the hereafter or anything like that, which we wouldn't personally believe in, we are simply looking at the life, marking the sadness and celebrating the life.
So what do you believe?
I believe that this is a pretty good world. It's not perfect, but I think that each of us is in this world, and we must do the best for ourselves, for our family, for others, right out to taking responsibility for our planet. I think it's a lot about taking responsibility. And I think sometimes there's a feeling that with religious people, God will sort it out. We believe, obviously, that we are where the buck stops, and we must take responsibility for ourselves and for the world we live in.
You never thought of running in an election, did you, by chance?
No, he's very good.
Maybe convince them to change their ideas about where the buck stops.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so tell me about, you spoke a little bit about a funeral service.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have to be a humanist to have a humanist?
No, not at all. We will conduct...
I mean, where do I register to be a humanist?
We'll conduct a humanist ceremony for anybody who wants one. And I think more and more people are sort of... You know, I think for a long time, even people who weren't terribly religious, the sort of default was you went to the church and you had you had a religious funeral, and that was fine and very understandable.
A rite of passage sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But we feel that we can provide this in a very personal and meaningful way, and I think there is a sort of a trend towards this. I mean, I think it's moving very slowly in Ireland. I mean, just to put it in context, I started doing this sort of work about 7 years ago. And my first year, I did about 2 or 3 funerals. I've done 4 already this year, and I have another 2 booked. Last year, the Humanist Association, there's a number of us who conduct these ceremonies. We did 51 last year. Now, it's still a very small number, but it's growing very fast. We're almost doubling every year, and I think it will gain momentum. I was in Australia in September, and I went to see the Humanists in Sydney and just asked them how it is over there. And they astounded me by telling me that only 30% of funerals there are religious, which is just amazing. They've really gone the other way. In England, it's moving that way as well. The British Humanist Association conduct about 8,000 funerals a year. Now, I know there's a big difference in population, but if you adjust for population, we're talking probably we should be doing about 650. So I think we're sort of, we have a long way to go.
Do you believe in a God?
I don't believe in a God.
Did you ever believe in a God?
Oh, I did, because I was brought up that way like everybody else. But then I started
as a Christian, presumably. Yes.
I was brought up Church of Ireland.
Church of Ireland, but in Christian nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yes, of course I did. I went along with what I was taught and what I was told to believe until I started thinking about it. And I was educated by the Quakers, who I think are great people. I was in Newtown down in Waterford. And I think we were really sort of encouraged to think, and I suppose it was there that I really started to think. And then I sort of drifted for quite a while. But about 10 years ago, I had a business in England, and I went to a funeral one day, which was the funeral of the mother of a very good friend of mine. And I went to this funeral, assuming, naturally, that it would be a religious funeral. I didn't know there was anything else. And it was a humanist funeral, and I was just sort of knocked out by it. Family members spoke. The grandchildren read little poems they'd written about their grandmother. The celebrant talked about the sadness at losing this person, but celebrating the life. And there was music that was appropriate. And it was like an electric light bulb.
I don't want to get too voyeuristic, because it's not fair on people who are deceased and who've passed on. Yeah. But so I die tomorrow and I want a humanist service. What happens to me? What happens to the body? Where do I end up?
Oh, well...
Would you perform a humanist service in a church?
I probably
in a school
wouldn't.
hall? Can you do it anywhere? Can you do it at home? What happens?
Well, I have done them at home. Most of them are held in one of the crematoriums, because they're convenient and they're in neutral places. And we've got 3 crematoriums here in Dublin. We've got one in Cork, and that's where most of them are held. Mary Raftery's, as I said, was in the Royal Hospital because everyone knew it would be a very, very big one. There was a humanist funeral a couple of years ago in the Round Room in the Mansion House. I've conducted funerals. Yesterday I conducted a funeral down in Cove in County Cork, where we simply were at the graveside. A beautiful old cemetery in just outside Cove, very old, very historic. I saw a big mass grave there for people who had died on the Lusitania in 1915. And it was so poignant because obviously I thought of what's going on in Glandore at the moment, and there was a very striking connection, as you can imagine. But I stood there, this wonderful old man who had been a school teacher and an artist, and he was not religious in any way, and his family asked me to conduct his funeral. We simply stood around the grave. I stood at the grave and spoke. There were about 150 people there, and it was a beautiful atmosphere. This man whose funeral we were conducting, he was a great Gaelic scholar as well, and a friend of his spoke us Gaelic. I have to confess I didn't understand a word of it because I'm not an Irish speaker. One of his daughters read a Shakespeare sonnet, which was something that her father had loved. And then as we lowered the coffin into the grave, the other daughter played the coulin on her fiddle. And it was all about this man. His family were involved. It was very, very moving.
So no ashes to ashes, dust to dust, no prayers, none of that?
No prayers. We reflected on his life. We sympathised with the family. We thanked everyone else for coming to support the family. We talked about that balance between sadness and celebrating the life. We reflected a little bit on his life. His friend spoke in Irish. We talked a little bit at the end about the continuum of life and how your influence goes on after you're gone through those you've touched in life, which I think is our sort of equivalent, if you like, of a priest maybe talking about eternal life, which we don't buy into.
It's a nice way of looking at it, actually,
yeah,
isn't it?
and I think it's very real, and and afterwards, I mean, I know in these occasions people come up to you and say, "Oh, that was very nice," and you wonder whether they really mean it, because everyone just wants to be nice to you. But a lot of people came up and they said, "Goodness, I've never been to anything like that before, and I never thought there was anything different." Just the same as me 10 years ago, and I think there was a certain ring of honesty about a lot of it. One guy came up and clapped me in the back and said, "Fair play to you, man. That's a first for Cove." And, that's sort of nice.
And had he been to the church beforehand?
There was no church.
There was no church involved at all. I'm just curious about that. And then did they have a separate service?
No, generally speaking...
he came straight from either his home
He came
or
straight
the
from
mortuary?
his home. He had been waked in his home.
In his home, yeah.
Which is a lovely thing as well and shouldn't die out. In fact, I think it's coming back more. The more and more funerals I'm involved in, I find they bring the body back to the home, which I think it's nice. That's the home. I mean, it seems sad to have the body somewhere else, I think, but that's personal.
Why did you have to go down and do it? I mean, what you're saying there seems to me they could have phoned Joe Duffy. So, Joe, were you busy? Could you come down?
Well, maybe Joe wasn't available. I don't know.
I'm a little bit facetious, but do you understand? It strikes me that, why does it have to have a title? Couldn't anybody stand there?
Of course.
And just, you're next, and you're next, and you're next, like a master of ceremonies.
Of course, Derek. And I would be the first to admit that. And I often say it to people. I mean, I have no humanist equivalent of God-given right, if you know what I mean, to do this. But I have, I suppose I've just performed an awful lot of ceremonies, and I've maybe just got some experience in it, and I have become known to a lot of funeral directors. And when a family goes to a funeral director and says that they've lost someone, the old situation would be, immediately, we'll get on to the priest, what parish are you in? But now the funeral directors are telling me more and more, people are saying, well, actually, we weren't religious. We never went to Mass. And in some cases, they'll even say, actually, the person who has died really doesn't want that.
But tell me, how sincere are you when you're standing there at the graveside? And I ask you that for a reason, because... I'll tell you why I'm asking it first. Because you go to services, to funerals particularly, and a priest will stand up and...
Yes, I know.
And no disrespect meant by this next comment for people listening. I'm just saying it as I saw it.
No, I know.
And we'll talk about the person, how wonderful they are. And you know damn well he never met the bloke in his life.
Yeah. Now, Derek, let me just say...
So when you go down, you've gone in now to Cork. You live in Dublin, and did you know the person? I'm just curious.
Derek, I was down in Cork last Sunday giving a talk about Humanist Ceremonies at a meeting, okay? And I had decided to stay on over. I was staying overnight because I wanted to catch up with some friends. I got a phone call at 10:20 that night from a funeral director saying that this man had died and the family wanted a humanist funeral. They knew that I had done Mary Raftery's, and they'd asked, is there any way we can get on to this guy, Brian Whiteside? And they phoned me, and coincidentally, I was staying in the Imperial Hotel in Cork that night. And I was asked to phone the family there and then. I phoned them, and I was on the phone with them until nearly 11:30 on Sunday night. I met them in their home on Monday morning and spent quite a bit of time with them, talking about how I would approach this, how we would do it, what sort of words I would use, and suggesting to them who might contribute, maybe a piece of poetry. What did John like? Is there music that should be played? And what I say to a family is, what we should try to do is capture the essence of this person in marking this sad occasion. And so I didn't know the person, but I put as much as I can into helping the family to structure the ceremony. And I think, in a situation like this, family don't know what to do. They've never been in this situation before. If you're going to a priest, there is a fallback. I mean, the Mass is a set pattern, the prayers and the readings, etc. So we are starting with a blank sheet. And part of what I do, I think what I can do for a family, is to help them to structure. So you're a
facilitator in many ways.
I'm a facilitator. And then they want somebody. Yes, they could get anybody. But I just have carved out a niche for myself, if you like. And I have developed some, paragraphs of words which I think can work in certain situations. And I've put it together, and I think that's not a bad thing.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but
Derek,
that's why I said please accept it the way I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Because I've been at those services and you wonder, do they really know them? And it's something that irritates, gets right under my skin.
Derek,
that's only a personal feeling.
I have a great friend who he swims every day in the 40-foot, and I often meet him down walking by the 40-foot because I live near there. In fact, he used to work in RTE, Michael Johnson.
Yeah.
He was a
used
producer.
to work here in radio.
Yeah. And I was talking to Michael about funerals one day, and Michael said to me, he says, I think a good funeral is one where there's not too many lies told. And I think that has a ring of truth about it. And I think we set out to, in as honest and positive a way as possible, to reflect on that life, to capture the essence of the person, celebrate it. There are some sad ones. I did another one last week where the woman had contacted me in the early part of last year and asked to meet me. I met her. She told me that she was dying of cancer. She told me she had basically fallen out with her family, lost touch with most of her friends, and she had no religion. And when she died, she said to me that she wanted me to conduct her funeral. She was very clear in what she wanted. We discussed it all, and we put it all together, and she died in the early part of last week, and I conducted her funeral. And it was such a marked contrast to Mary Raftery's. I'm glad to say that Ireland being Ireland, she wasn't on her own, or I wasn't on my own. She had said to me there'd be no one at my funeral, but that doesn't happen very often in Ireland.
People always turn up.
People found out, and people crawled out of the woodwork.
They do too, yeah.
And it was heartening and wonderful. But I'm surprised at the number of people now who phone me and want to make their sort of what I call their eventual arrangements. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've got all these files at home of people who I've met who've put together what they want for when they die. And, I'm amazed, maybe not amazed, but, the number of people who are just so clear and this is what they want and please
and
make
you're
sure.
okay with that, with whatever the person
I'm okay
wants.
with that.
So how would you feel if somebody wanted euthanasia?
Well, that's a totally separate topic.
No, I'm just curious. I want to know what you think about it. If the service and what you believe is all about the people. This is what they want.
Absolutely. I have read up a lot about euthanasia. I have debated it on many occasions, and I believe that it should be an option for those extremely difficult cases. I remember some years ago. Do you remember that movie, A Short Holiday in Switzerland?
I know it was on BBC, I think. No, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
Well, I mean, that was a real life.
About the Dignitas clinic there.
That was a real life situation. Yeah. And the woman who took her life, her family all came over here and they were on the Late Late Show with Pat Kenny some years ago. And I was invited on the Late Late Show with them because I had an interest in this. Mm-hmm. And I met all the family. And they all told me that when their mother had originally told them about her plans to end her life, because she was a medical doctor, her husband had died of a similar disease, she knew exactly what was in
store for her, yeah.
And she knew that her pain would not be controlled and it would be just awful and her dignity would be gone and all of that. And her family at first were totally against it and said, no. And in the end, they all went to Zurich with her, as you maybe know from the movie. And, I mean, goodness me, there's just no words to describe something like that. But they ended up campaigning for legalising euthanasia because they saw that in a case like their mother's, it was... And, it's just such an awful thing to talk about, but they just saw that it was...
So you think in cases like that, there is an argument for people to make their own decisions about how they live and how they die?
Derek, I find it hard to get into the absolute nitty-gritty of how it should be done.
Well, I was just curious. I don't want to have a big debate about euthanasia anyway, but do you do any... I don't want to say any positive things, happy things. It is all positive what you're doing, but do you do weddings?
I do weddings. I mean, I do far more weddings than I do funerals, and I do lovely little naming ceremonies for babies. You know, we
so
mark
instead of christenings,
yes,
sort of thing.
Yeah, and you smile when you hear that.
What can you do for communions or confirmations?
Well, that's a good one, and we're looking at that, but we haven't quite got there yet. But
can I just say,
yeah.
if you have a group of children in
Yeah.
a class, and one of them is being brought up in a tradition,
I know.
of a humanist tradition,
Yeah.
and as we know, there's everything in the schools now. It's just Catholic or just Protestant or whatever.
Yeah.
So a little child feels a little left out. So the
Yeah,
parents
I
would probably
totally
be
agree with
looking
you.
at something
Yeah,
to
we're
make them feel that they're
looking
kind
at
of
it.
part of
We're looking
the
at
system.
it. Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to the biggest. The country that has the most humanists per head of population is Norway. They've got 70,000 humanists there. And they have a very, very big programme for...
They're a very big country, but they haven't got a huge population relative to the size of the country, I'm thinking. I can't remember what it is in Norway. Is it 6 or 7 million or something
like that?
It's not huge anyway.
They've 70,000... I mean, we only have 500 members.
Yeah.
Although we always hasten to add that we in a funny sort of a way, we represent a much larger number of people, people who are not religious. In the most recent census, we haven't got the detailed breakdown of figures, but the previous census, 186,000 people ticked no religion, and a further 70,000 people just ignored the question.
Would you claim them as humanists?
No, absolutely not. But I think what we are is a voice for the non-religious, because I think non-religious need a voice.
Well, let's say I was to be a humanist. Do I have to... Well, let's go to Nocht and then we'll come back.
Okay.
One or two more questions. Have you got another few minutes?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You have, great. Lots of emails, needless to say, coming in on this. Niall in Galway, excellent piece, Derek, well done. I was brought up as a Catholic, but have shed that belief system in recent years. It is difficult coming out. I am now a non-theist, but I'm still a spiritual person. What I miss about organised religion is communion. Is there a regular gathering of humanists anywhere in Galway? That's what I was going to ask you before the break.
Yes.
Do I become a humanist? How do I become a humanist?
Yeah.
I got baptised as a Christian. My parents just happened to be Catholic, so I just ended up that way, not of my own choosing. But if I decided now I want to be a humanist, what happens to me, and do I go somewhere every Sunday?
Well, not every Sunday. I suppose what we're trying to do as a humanist organisation, we're trying to do three things. One is we're trying to create some sort of a community. The other thing was we're trying to, or we're providing ceremonies, as we've been talking about. And the third thing is we're campaigning for some change. So we have 3 C's. We have community, ceremonies and campaigning. But on the community, we meet once a month in Dublin. We don't have any premises. We only sort of exist on a website and on mobile phones and things like that. But we meet in Buswell's Hotel the first Sunday of every month at 4:00. And what we tend to do is to debate topical issues. We might have a guest speaker, that sort of thing. Yes, we do have a group that meet once a month in Galway as well, and in Limerick and in Cork. That's what I was doing in Cork last Sunday. In fact, we're really at a very early stage in our evolution. We are hoping that in years to come, we'll have groups all around the country. As well as that, we have celebrants like me, who do weddings and funerals and naming ceremonies. We have them around the country, but we don't have the whole country covered because we're still at such an early stage in our evolution.
And listeners are asking, and I asked you during the break, do you get paid?
Yes, I do get paid. For weddings, I charge a fee, which I think is fair and reasonable. For funerals, we suggest a fee. I work very closely with the funeral directors and we understand one another very well. And they explain to me that priests get something for each funeral they do.
People make donations. Yeah.
Well, in the Dublin diocese, it's a little bit more structured. There is a standard fee that most of them get paid.
From who?
Oh, the family. Well, it's paid by the funeral director, but it comes ultimately from the family.
Okay,
yeah.
go on.
And it was suggested that we would have a suggested fee similar to that. Sorry to cut in, Derek.
No, you're okay.
We always do say that in the case of funerals, that's a suggested fee. If it's a hard case, we'll waive it, we'll lower it, I think for funerals we are providing
case by case.
We are providing a service, and it's case by case.
That's why I was a little bit surprised when you said
the
guys are being paid directly in the Catholic Church.
I
assume that people gave donations because they wanted to give it.
Yeah,
I didn't think it was structured that you had to give it. It shows how ignorant I am. I'm actually a bit shocked at that.
It's different in different places.
All right.
Yeah.
So presumably you make a return to the revenue and all that kind of stuff. So your job description?
I'm a humanist celebrant.
Humanist celebrant. So there won't be many of you.
No, there aren't.
Department inside of revenue.
I remember
just one person.
In fact, when I started doing this, I opened a separate bank account so that everything would be sort of easy to track. And when I was opening the account, the guy said to me, "What's your occupation?" I said, "Humanist celebrant." And he looked at me. It wasn't quite, how do you spell that? Is what? So, I'm very, very clear on it. I don't mind saying it out on the airwaves. I get fees in. I have a lot of expenses because I'm driving all over the country. I've got to run a car. I've got to sometimes stay overnight and things like that. And I expense that against it. And whatever I've left at the end of the year, I'm very happy to pay my taxes on.
No, I was just curious about that.
Will
you talk to Aileen? Hello, Aileen. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Go ahead,
Aileen.
I'm just listening with interest to the comments with regard to the Mass and for the dead, and I think it's a beautiful presentation. It's a beautiful service. It's lovely for the families, and it's a great consolation to them. And you have the opportunity for any member of the family to go up and speak and thank the people who've come there and attended the Mass for their relative. And it's absolutely beautiful. And I can't understand why the gentleman there hasn't got any sympathy for it.
Oh, I have every sympathy for it, Aileen. I think for anybody who is religious, they should they should mark these occasions in a religious context. But for people who are not religious, it seems, I suppose, disingenuous or maybe even hypocritical to go through a religious ceremony if you are not religious.
Oh, it's hypocritical.
Yeah. Oh no,
but I just felt that you were putting aside the religious aspect of death.
No, it's whatever a family want. It's free.
And the person who died
choice.
particularly would want.
Yeah, I mean, I think all I'm doing, I'm not for one moment trying to impose my ideas or anything like that on anybody else. All I'm trying to do is offer an alternative to people who find that more appropriate. And I'm finding that more and more people want that. But of course, there's still a huge number of people who prefer to have a religious ceremony, and that's absolutely appropriate and right.
You've just said a second that more people want that.
Yeah.
Well, more people don't want that. The majority of people would prefer, I'm speaking on my own, would prefer the religious ceremony and the Mass because it's absolutely beautiful.
Well, beautiful to somebody, who buys into it, who believes in it. But let me just make one little point that I think is worth making. If you take marriages, up until maybe 20 years ago, nearly all marriages were church marriages, with a very, very small number registry office.
True,
in 1996, 6% were non-religious. In 2006, that had gone up to 35%. And the Central Statistics Office predicts that this year or next year, there will be more non-religious wedding ceremonies in Ireland than religious. So I think that shows a very definite trend.
I know, it may sound, but it's so cold and so impersonal.
Oh no, it's not cold, Aileen. I promise you that. If I conducted a ceremony that was cold, I would give up.
Well, where I'm sitting, there is nothing to compare with the marriage of the sacrament of marriage.
Aileen, I'm delighted that you feel like that, and that's how you should feel for yourself. But it is each person to themselves.
Actually, and it should be about what the person who is dying or who has died wants for her or himself. Wouldn't you agree, Aileen?
Oh, I agree.
Because
it
what
be the
happens
wish of the person who has
absolutely,
deceased.
and what has happened in the past, people who have expressed their wishes, not always have those wishes been carried out at the end of the day. They when they don't want to go to churches, they still end up in churches in some cases.
Well, that would be a sweeping statement. We are not in a position to know that for certain.
I know of a couple of people that happened to.
Well,
to be honest with you. So anyway, I didn't make a sweeping statement, but I have said I know of it. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But at any rate, Aileen, I think you'll understand that Brian and you have different views on what should happen at the end of life.
I want him to respect mine.
Of course, I respect your
I
view.
most certainly say the majority of people in this country are practicing Catholics. The majority.
Well, I don't know that, but I know a lot of them are.
I would say the majority are. If not, they are Catholic, and most certainly some who are not actually
why do you
practicing
think, just
would still wish to be married in a Catholic church.
Aileen, just out of curiosity, why do you think Brian has anything against people who want to be buried in a Catholic church?
I just felt his sympathy lay with the other type of ceremony.
But he's in to tell us what humanists do and to explain how the services differ and what he does. You know, that's what he's here to talk about today, so we can get an insight into that. We all pretty much have an idea of how the Catholic Church operates.
Well, I don't know. I'm just giving my opinion and how wonderful it is.
It is, and thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely
And that's why we were delighted to have you on.
I appreciate those who don't wish it, wish to have the ceremony, but I'm just sort of emphasising the wonder and how wonderful it is, the Catholic ceremony and the Mass for the dead, and the prayers afterwards, and the people who are concerned, families, can go forward and thank those who have come and give some history of the person dead. Actually, the priest quite often will give a background history of the person who has deceased, and it's absolutely beautiful.
No, it is very nice, but we have had one person who's texted in saying,
absolutely beautiful.
on that subject, I can read out a comment from...
It's absolutely beautiful in more cases than not.
Yeah, let me read this out.
That's
here
great.
In a second. Derek, are you still there, Aileen?
Yes.
On that subject alone, Derek, that is the most salient question you have ever asked. When my mum died, the one thing I didn't want was the priest talking about her as if he knew her. And that's from one of our listeners. That was a question.
A member of the family can go up. Nothing to stop them from going up.
No, it was to do with the point. No, just on the point you were making about, the priest will liaise with the family and then say a few things, and this is what somebody is saying. So different views and different...
Well, it isn't always the case. In some cases, the priest will know them personally.
Of course. We know that.
Of course.
Endeavour to have somebody who will know the person personally to say the Mass, etc. And there's nothing more beautiful.
I'm sure that must be very beautiful.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Totally
nothing
agree.
more beautiful, and particularly when there's music and the homily, and and the readings, it's just beautiful. I would ask for nothing more.
Well, thank you very much, and I totally agree with you.
Thank
there you
you.
go. Okay, Aileen.
And I have sympathy for those who don't wish to have this ceremony.
Oh, they mightn't
And
need
don't
sympathy.
wish to
They
have
mightn't
the
need
Mass.
sympathy, Aileen, in fairness. It's a decision they make themselves.
I agree. That
Okay,
it's
no.
hypocritical.
Thank you, Aileen. I wish you
If
well.
I can just come in just for one moment, and I agree that it's hypocritical if you're not a practicing Catholic or Christian to have the ceremony in the end of your life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aileen,
Thanks,
I
Aileen.
wish you well.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. God
Bye-bye.
bless.
Thanks, Aileen. And Aileen's view, just as important and as relevant as Brian's view. Just let me state that also. But we did ask Brian to give us an insight into how humanists operate. Yeah. As I was saying, how the Catholic Church operates, we know that. So, Brian, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Not at all. Thank you, Derek.
You've got to get out now because we've no more time for you.
Okay, well, I've enjoyed it, and thank you very much indeed.
It was nice to meet you. Brenda was wondering just before you go, though, it might be interesting for the public to hear about whether or not you could go along to a ceremony.
We were talking yesterday on the programme about weddings and the cost of them and the priest and the flowers and all that. I'm just wondering if you're performing a humanist wedding and the couple are agreeable. I would love to come along on behalf of the Mooney Show and just get an insight into it and how it differs, compared to your regular wedding. Because we've had the registry office and all that. So we'd love that.
I'm sure we could arrange that. We'll
if
talk
a
about
couple
that.
are bonkers enough to have us there, we'd love to be there.
Brian, thank you very much indeed. Nice to meet you, and sorry